Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning. As we embark on the final day of the Asia Economic Dialogue 2024, let's take a moment to reflect on the enriching journey we've had so far. We've witnessed captivating discussions led by eminent experts from around the world. Day one laid a solid foundation with insightful sessions on economic integration in South Asia and an engaging fireside chat on women and geoeconomics. Day two took us on the incredible exploration of generative AI, India's pivotal position in IT, the fascinating future of both automotives and drones, and finally, the evolving contours of globalization. But fear not, our final day promises to be nothing short of extraordinary. We're gearing up for a thought-provoking dialogue on reimagining the World Trade Organization. Also, securing our future through critical technologies, advancing regional connectivity in South Asia, and ending with India in the era of flux. So be ready to recharge those brain cells and get ready to dive into another day packed with enlightening conversations and invaluable insights. Let's make this last day a day to remember. Okay, so moving on to reimagining and revitalizing the World Trade Organization. As we gather here today, we are faced with a critical juncture in the history of the World Trade Organization. For some time now, the WTO has grappled with an existential crisis with its core functions of negotiation, dispute settlement, and trade monitoring either stalled or collapsed completely. The once ambitious Doha round, launched amidst great participation and anticipation, faltered due to lack of political will among the major players, leaving the WTO without significant multilateral agreements. While initiatives like the fisheries subsidies agreement have been attempted, they remain incomplete, highlighting the challenges of consensus building. The WTO then embarked on the risky plurilateral exercise called Joint Statement Initiatives, which has a large number of WTO members subscribing to it, but some key countries like India that have chosen not to be part of it. Moreover, the dispute settlement mechanism, once hailed as the crown jewel in the WTO, has ceased to function effectively, largely due to disputes between the US over the appellate body. This impasse has left the mechanism in limbo, undermining its credibility and effectiveness. Against this backdrop, the 13th WTO Ministerial Conference in Abu Dhabi just happened from February the 26th to the 29th and became crucial. And as we convene today on March the 2nd, it provides us with an opportunity to conduct a post-mortem of the Ministerial Conference and chart a path forward for reimagining and revitalizing the WTO. Our esteemed panelists will offer their insights on key issues, including WTO reform, revival of the dispute settlement mechanism, the future of joint statement initiatives, food security, and other pertinent matters. Following their presentations, we'll engage in a Q&A session to delve deeper into specific questions and draw conclusions on the way forward for the WTO. The session will be chaired by Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Mohan Kumar, can I welcome you onto the stage, Ambassador? Please give him a big round of applause. Ambassador Kumar is an ex-diplomat. He's Professor of Diplomatic Practice at O.P. Jindal Global University, also serving as Dean of Strategic and International Initiatives. With a 36-year career in India's Foreign Service, he notably served as ambassador to France, fostering the strategic partnership, and to Bahrain during the Arab Spring. His expertise includes multilateral negotiations, particularly in GATT, WTO, and the UN, leading to the Paris Accord. Ambassador Kumar is an author and speaker on foreign policy and holds an MBA from the University of Delhi and a PhD from Sciences Po in Paris. I would also like to welcome onto the stage Dr. Asle Toje. Deputy Leader of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a big welcome. Dr. Toje serves as the Deputy Leader of the Norwegian Nobel Committee and is a former research director at the Norwegian Nobel Institute. He completed his PhD at Cambridge and has lectured at universities worldwide. His research focuses on the intersection of security studies and European studies, with notable works including America, the EU, and strategic culture, and Will China's Rise Be Peaceful? Thank you for joining us today. And finally, I'd like to welcome Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe, a research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies in Sri Lanka. Dr. Wijesinghe, please come onto the stage, and can you please give him a big round of applause? He's a research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies in Sri Lanka, specializing in international trade, regional integration, and industrial policy. Holding degrees from prestigious universities, his research delves into trade policies that impact on house food security, GVC participation, and regional trade agreement effects. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vandana. Very good morning to all of you. I want to thank Pune International Center and Ambassador Gautam Bambawale in particular for this amazing opportunity. I don't know if he fixed the time, keeping in mind the conclusion date of the WTO conference, which he couldn't have known in advance. So could you believe it? This is the first forum about the discussion of the Ministerial Conference 13 at Abu Dhabi, and it is Pune International Center which will have the honor of discussing it. I mean, from tomorrow you will find the press completely subsumed with reports about this, but this is the first session because it concluded at 2 o'clock last morning. Some of us, especially our Sri Lankan friend, has a wonderful PowerPoint for you, making at least some conclusions of the ministerial conference. I just don't want to take too much time because I'd rather discuss issues. I'm going to make some introductory remarks, then give it to our Sri Lankan friend Asanka, who has got a PowerPoint, and then to my good friend Asle, who will tell us his perspective as well. As Vandana mentioned very pertinently, the WTO is supposed to perform three functions. You've got a negotiating function, you've got a dispute settlement function, and you've got a trade monitoring function. For purpose of function practicality, we will not discuss the last one, which is trade monitoring. In any case, WTO does that. If some of you are interested, I'm looking at the young people. The WTO website is a good one. Their annual reports are good. If you are a trade expert, you simply have to look at the WTO's annual report and UNCTAD's annual investment report. That will give you a fund of knowledge and information for those of you who are just beginning a career in international trade. So I'm going to essentially focus this panel's discussion on the two important pillars of WTO, the negotiating function and the dispute settlement function. And as Vandana hinted in her opening remarks, the WTO has not been performing well. I'm trying to now sound my diplomatic best when I say that. You could use worse words for the WTO. It's been paralyzed, it's been really dysfunctional, it's been dormant, it's moribund. You can say many things, but I think it's not been functioning well. The negotiating function of the WTO has two predominant and thorny issues. One is the scope of the subjects that need to be discussed in the WTO, and the membership is split down the middle. I will refer to it in a minute. The second issue with regard to the negotiating function is the decision-making process in the WTO. The WTO is a very interesting thing, and you should know this. The WTO texts and agreements provide for voting in the WTO. No question, there can be voting, but WTO doesn't in practice. And that gives enormous power for individual countries to block. India has used it, United States has used it, other countries have used it. But make no mistake, when we drafted the rules, and I was involved in the drafting of the rules, we said, if you have 2/3 majority of voting in the WTO, then you can get anything done. But the WTO has a long history of not resorting to voting, and I'm happy to answer questions if you want. One of the interesting things is that when we had the legal drafting group, among 125 countries, guess which 2 countries opposed voting? The world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy. That's the ironic part of it. You know, the authoritarian countries were okay with voting, but US and India were not. And there are reasons for it. So we will talk about why the developed countries want subjects like no disrespect meant gender in WTO, labor in WTO, environment in WTO. What does India want? India says, listen, can you please fix the agriculture agreement, which is so patently unfair to developing countries? Can you fix the fishermen subsidies, which affects the livelihood of fishermen in India? So there is a real dichotomy between the negotiating interests, and when it comes to decision making, of course, any single country can object, and that has been the bane of WTO in many ways. So that is as far as the negotiating function is concerned. The second is the dispute settlement, and as was pointed out, it was the crown and the jewel. We used to be so proud of the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO. Which other forum can you have a dispute between United States and Antigua-Barbuda, and Antigua-Barbuda wins compensation against the US? That is how proud we were about the WTO dispute settlement mechanism. Since Barack Obama's time, you know, you should be careful not to blame Mr. Donald Trump for everything. Huh? So even Barack Obama had his faults. So he started blocking the appointment of people to the appellate body. So what WTO does is it has a 2-step dispute settlement mechanism. First, you have panelists who judge the dispute. People like me, I've done 12 disputes in the GATT WTO system. People like me judge it. Then it goes to 7 wise men or women who finally rule on the dispute. But once the appellate body has ruled, you have no further discourse. It's not like the UN, WIPO, and other organizations where you talk till the cows come home. In the WTO, it's dollars and cents. You lose a dispute, you pay compensation to the country which won. That's as simple as that. The US has been having shall we say, a beef with this dispute settlement mechanism because they've been losing some cases, and for a variety of reasons, they started blocking the appointment of the appellate body, again because of the famous consensus rule. One country, everybody is happy with the appellate body except one country. It's like what the EU representative has said yesterday. He has very diplomatically said last night in Abu Dhabi that there is only one country which opposed the fisheries deal. No prizes for guessing which country that was. So one country can do it, and so we have a situation where the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO has completely collapsed. So no negotiations are going on to the extent they should, and there is no dispute settlement resolution. And hence the question, why the hell do you need a WTO? If you're not going to negotiate, and if you're not going to settle disputes, why do you need the WTO? So that is the existential crisis reference to which was made in the opening remarks. So that's the problem we have today. I'm going to leave it at that just to give you a flavor. The best way to characterize the ministerial conference which just concluded last night in Abu Dhabi is it was a relative failure. I don't want to describe it by calling it a dismal failure. It was a relative failure. They've agreed to some things. Most things have been left for negotiations down the road. There is a diplomatic parlance in which you kick the can down the road. That's what this ministerial conference has done. I'm going to leave it at that. Helpfully, and we have to thank my colleague Asanka very much for that. He's got a PowerPoint. He's been burning the midnight oil for you guys, so please give him a round of applause. Thank you very much, Asanka. If you can present the MC13 and your own PowerPoint, then I'll go to Asle and then we'll have a round of comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, I will write down the time so I can plan the talk within 10 minutes. Well, first, we should give some credit to the WTO. After the end of World War, it brought down tariff to a significant level. For example, around 1986, the applied tariff level was 13.6, and it was cut down by 2008 down to 7.5. This phase is called as the golden age of globalization. We saw a lot of tariff cuts happening all around the world, very powerful trade agreements like NAFTA. And also, China acceded to the WTO around 2000, which was significant in many ways. Yeah. So WTO has old issues and new issues. Old issues were mainly due to this regionalism. Behind WTO, countries started to get into PTAs. We call them as preferential trade agreement. Because WTO more into a shallow integration, but the nations wanted a deep integration, especially addressing the behind border issues. For example, regulatory convergence. These were all issues, regionalism versus multilateralism, and developing countries' special status, also the environmental standards. But there are new set of issues. Dr. Kumar explained them. One is the dispute resolution. It is effectively killed now. There is no alternative mechanism. There is one European Union was pushing it, but it was not much successful. And no consensus on fishing and agricultural subsidies. Also, the revival of strategic trade or industrial policy. So these things are happening right now, effectively lowering the powerfulness of the WTO. So as a European diplomat said, this reported by Politico, it is not about free trade anymore. It is about strategic trade, where everyone is making rules that are convenient to them. So we have come to that point right now. You can see the rampant industrial policy. There is a very useful paper published by Simon Evernett. He has this database about the new measures of industrial policies. You can see there is a big rise of industrial policy measures taken by the countries. And in this database, there are some insights you can use, especially to identify. For example, China, EU, and the US account for 48 of these measures. So the advanced economics are using mainly subsidies in their industrial policy. Developing and the emerging markets, they are using loans, tax relief, capital, and equity injection. One major subsidy program was Inflation Reduction Act introduced by the US. It has exclusion criteria, mainly China and some other foreign entities of concern are excluded from these consumer credits, and also domestic component requirement. Then we can see environmental regulations are some form of protectionism, carbon border adjustment mechanism. And more importantly, we can see diversifying away from non-friendly countries. So this is happening not because of any economic rationale, but geopolitics and strategic concerns. So basically, we should ask this question: is WTO dead right now? We can argue for both these. One thing is we cannot see a political commitment for revival. We don't see that, especially the powerful countries are very keen about reviving this. There is a bipartisan consensus about these appellate bodies blocking by the US. Even Biden administration is not working on to solve that. And continuation of Trump-era tariff is a major concern even under the Biden administration. And he very systematically started industrial policy through this Inflation Reduction Act. The EU is showing some willingness, but the observation is that EU is also testing the limits of WTO system with tools like CBM and deforestation. And yes, without reform, it will become increasingly difficult for the WTO to exercise these functions, but at the moment, it is doing the job. This is some other aspect, other argument. There are good things, positive things happened in MC3 concluded yesterday. For example, moratorium for digital tax on digital trade was extended for another 2 years. And LDCs joined, Timor and Comoros. I think they believe that this is a way forward for prosperity. And there are some positive outcomes about domestic regulation of services. And LDCs will be granted LDC benefits even after the graduation for up to 3 more years. These are positive outcomes of yesterday's concluded MC3. However, agriculture subsidies, mainly stockholding programs, India is very concerned about that. There was no solution for that. And dispute settlement, the wording is like recognize the progress and affirmed commitment. It is like a diplomatic wording, I think. Basically, nothing happened. Industrial policy, no agreement. It is blocked. EU's proposals were blocked. And fisheries subsidies, also no agreement were reached. So, unfortunately, these are the most important things MC13 had to discuss. So this is the Hindu news item around 5 a.m. In the morning. Despite hectic discussions, WTO MC13 ends with no deals on fisheries and agriculture. So this is the outcome of MC13. So what is the way forward? As economists, we can diagnose these things, but suggesting solutions, that's the most daunting task for us. A former US trade official is saying you could put the world's greatest matchmaker, arbiter, and negotiator in charge of the WTO right now, and I don't think much could happen. So this is a very delicate and complex situation right now. I would briefly talk what is the impact on us as a South Asian countries. One thing is we benefited from this, joining to the global value chain and also unlocking our comparative advantage. Now this weak WTO will incentivize regionalism and also kind of affect negatively our technical innovation, growth, and poverty reduction. However, is regionalism is a way forward? That's the main question. We have evidence that South Asia's regional attempts, RTAs, did not cause any trade gain. Their impact was trivial. For example, we have South Asia Free Trade Agreement, into Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, into Sri Lanka-Pakistan Free Trade Agreement, and we have a crop of free trade agreements, but the impact on trade, cross-border trade, and global value chain participation is trivial and sometimes negative. Also, these regional initiatives are mercantilist and strategic. They like, okay, we will give you some concessions, you give us some concessions. But these are like, you are not willing to open up strategic industries within the country. Because of that, the factor market liberalization is not happening. It is important for the structural adjustment. If you are interested in unlocking your potential, you can see India is located #1 in the world as the most potential country to increase the economic complexity of the export basket. But to do that, we should join to the global value chains. That's the only way. You can see the other countries, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, all are located in the lower left quadrant. So this is what I wanted to say. We, as Sri Lanka, have entered a lot of free trade agreements, but we are giving a lot of protection for domestic industries. We are not, trade negotiators are not touching these areas in possible bilateral trade negotiations. So regionalism may not be much beneficial if they are negotiated in a strategic way. So a way forward, maybe developed countries looking for a solution to globalization fatigue. If you look at this as an economic issue, maybe developed countries try to increase their industrial tariff and try to open a negotiation, so they have leverage. Reducing farm subsidies and also relaxation of STD should be discussed whether these things will bring us to a negotiation table. However, it is a daunting task. You can see in South Asian countries, over time, agricultural contribution to GDP has come down, but labor force is still in agricultural sector. For example, Sri Lanka, the contribution of agricultural sector to GDP is just 6%, but 27% of labor force is in agricultural sector. So it is very difficult to liberalize the agricultural sector. So key takeaways are a weak WTO plus discriminatory industrial policy in the developed world will push South Asia to a lower equilibrium of growth. We should avoid that. Issue is increasingly a political one rather than an economic one. Economist has just, we can show, okay, this is the problem, but solution is with the politicians. Yet, reaching the national equilibrium tariff through retaliation makes both countries worse off than in free trade. We should not forget that important economic lesson. Yeah, it is a bit boring thing like national equilibrium and stuff, but students, if you are interested, you can check this. You can mathematically prove that free trade, national equilibrium means more welfare increasing. Okay, thank you very much. I think I took some more time here. Sorry about it.
Thank you very much, Asanka. Sometimes there is nothing like a PowerPoint which concentrates the minds of people, especially in the morning at 10 o'clock. So thank you very much. Now, before I ask Asle to make his remarks, I want to give the audience a flavor of what India is up against in the WTO. I've been saying this for a while, that whenever the new government takes office in May, the in-tray will only have trade, trade, and trade. Everything else is unimportant. I've been saying this, that you cannot do foreign policy on a shoestring budget. Right now, if you are a foreigner and you hear India talk, our strategic foreign policy sounds like we are a 10 trillion economy. Our trade policy sounds like you are a bloody 1 trillion economy. Forgive my language. So this disconnect is not something we can bridge easily. We have to grow, and we have to grow pretty fast. India had set itself 3 objectives before the ministerial conference in Abu Dhabi. The first objective was restoration of the appellate body. That was what India wanted. Second, India wanted a permanent solution for the public stockholding issue. We can't do this from year to year. You know the farmers and what they are doing on the border between Delhi and Haryana. You are all happily ensconced in Pune, but I am subject to it almost on a daily basis since I have to travel to my university. And while the farmers, I think, are not representative of the whole country, the fact of the matter is Punjab has started growing rice, hell of a lot of rice, which they should not be consuming at all. They should be going back to wheat. Rice requires 20 times more water than wheat. But the fact is they also want MSP. And MSP has a direct relevance to WTO. So that is what we are up against. And the larger issue about whether India reforms by conviction or compulsion, everything seems to indicate that we only reform under compulsion. There is no conviction per se in states and centers to reform. So the second was achieving a permanent solution. And the third objective that India had was in terms of protecting the livelihoods of fishermen. Now, if you see the MC13 in Abu Dhabi, the permanent solution for a public stockholding issue has been kicked down the road. No consensus, as Asanka pointed out, and it's now for a future. Appellate body has not been restored because the US is simply not in a position to decide. But this is where I find it would have been much better if the WTO was honest to itself. it now says we will try and do it by the end of 2024. How the hell can you do it by end of 2024 when the only country objecting to is United States, and you know the US is going towards election? I mean, we should be a little less hypocritical. At least you say it will take another 3 years, it doesn't matter. But just by saying end of 2024, and we all know what will happen if Mr. Donald Trump comes to power, you may actually find the US leaving WTO actually. It could be, it's now conceivable. So that has not happened. On the fishermen issue, since the EU has made this controversial statement last night, the EU commissioner, who says that there was only one country which blocked a fisheries deal, I want to set the record straight. I think it is less than disingenuous for the EU commissioner to say that. EU are the biggest subsidizers in fisheries. They do deep sea fishing. They spend a lot of money doing it. EU, US, China, Taiwan. These are the biggest subsidizers in fishing. They've just pretty much ensured that in the high seas and in your coastlines, there is no fish left. To kind of penalize the Indian fisherman who's basically fishing for survival is, I think, very unfair. I know it's a very special problem that India faces. It's sui generis, but I think India needs time. And that is where the negotiations failed. We did not get the special and differential treatment that we were asking. So I just wanted to set the record before I pass it on to my good friend Asle. And then we will have a round of questions with the panelists before I throw it open to the floor. Asle, you have the floor.
Dr. Kumar, thank you so much for your introductory remarks. I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this conference. Your professionalism and kindness has warmed my heart, and I think that everybody who has participated in this economic dialogue have become wiser and more informed for your efforts. So thank you very much. It's not the first time that Norwegians come to Pune. I would like just to start by remarking that the relationship between my homeland, Norway, and India goes very far back. In the 1600s and 1700s, Denmark built trading posts in India, and these were, for the most part, run by Norwegians. And on their way to the trading ports in Tamil Nadu and Bengal, it was an obligatory stop to go to via the bankers of Pune. So this is an ancient trading relation. I would also like to stress that I'm not speaking to you on behalf of the Norwegian Nobel Committee or on behalf of the Norwegian government. I'm in no position to do that. But I would like to say that although our initial comments have been determined by a certain amount of gloom, I think we should also keep in mind the bigger picture. We have been in this business for a long time. We have been doing trade for a long time. My country, Norway, has been a determined proponent of free and equitable trade for the longest time. And I think that the history of my country, being one of the most wealthy countries in the world, is an attestament to the wisdom of free trade. And since 1945, the global trade volumes have increased by some 4,500%. We're doing pretty well. So let's not completely lose all faith as we hear the downcast assessment of what happened in Abu Dhabi. The WTO was a child of Bretton Woods and the peace settlements after World War II. We have been talking about the WTO as an arena of negotiations. And I think that what has been said so far, that the problem with the WTO, it has become too large, and too many countries and regions can potentially block negotiations. That's a very valid criticism. And I think that the comments that have been made about the settlement mechanism is something that we all find exasperating, but it's a fact of life. It doesn't seem like it's going to spring back to life anytime soon. And I think, Mr. Ambassador, you're right about any progress being made in the short to medium term it's Neverland. It's not going to happen. But I think that one undervalued aspect of the WTO that is frequently forgotten is the question of transparency. And this is actually something that concerns me more than the deadlock in negotiations and the abrogation of the settlement system. I think that it would cause much greater danger to the global trades, a lack of transparency, and this is something that we see is emerging as another challenge due to the decreased relevance of the WTO. What I'm getting at is that bilateral FTAs have to a certain extent and to an ever larger extent replace the one-size-fits-all free trade agreement of the WTO. We see, to my mind, and you're free to disagree here, but I see 3 and potentially 4 competing regulatory spaces, if you will. One being the United States, through the sheer force of the American dollar and the centrality of the United States in the global trade. They are unilaterally imposing a set of rules, last seen over its various sanctions regimes that every actor will have to at least relate to, if not adhere to. At the same time, we see China building its own regulatory space through interlinked series of FTAs, where some 40% of Chinese trade is now carried out bilaterally and not within really the confines of the WTO. And at the same time, we have seen the European Union emerge as a regulatory space with also free trade distorting policies, but this time related to the green shift and the Millennium Goals, where the EU has taken it upon itself to be a proponent of furthering these agendas. I think it's going to be very interesting to see in the years to come whether India emerges as a 4th regulatory space, if you will. And I think that we see some trends towards India being more willing to lean more forwards, and I think that is also in part because India invested so much into negotiating in the WTO, sending some of the best diplomats, and I think it's fair to say that India has always negotiated in good faith, expecting and hoping for a receptive ear for reasonable demands. And I do see a certain amount of exasperation on behalf of India, and that might be also representative of a great many other countries around the world that sees important business like fisheries being left unaddressed, while there is very close to a consensus within the WTO about these issues, but there are still important blocking powers. We are now seeing some storm clouds on the horizon, and I would like to shortly address those. One is the statements now coming out of both North American, European capitals directed at China, warning the Chinese against dumping, especially within free product categories, one being solar panels, second being electronic vehicles, and third being iron and lithium batteries. And I think there is a great concern that China is going to undercut industries in Western countries, and this might actually blow up into a proper large-scale trade dispute, especially if the American election goes the way that Dr. Kumar outlined. India has had its own back and forth with the WTO concerning, not limited to, but about food subsidies in India and also import duties that India has been criticized for, and India being strongly objective to new green tariffs imposed by the EU, the fisheries questions, and a raft of other lesser questions that the Indians feel has not been properly addressed within the existing frameworks. And I think that it is fair to say, even if I am a representative of the West, at least I'm a child of the West, to say that Western countries, when it comes to subsidies and protectionist measures originating in green policies, we are not always wearing the white hat, if I may say that. I think that we have not always been negotiating in good faith, and I think that we must share our part of the blame for the current dysfunctionality of the WTA system. So, what is the road forward? And I think that we will all make our comments about that in the. But I thought I'd pitch in my first remarks about where do we go from here. I think that the former Norwegian Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt made some very good and sound remarks about multilateralism as a global value. I think that pretty much all scholarship would say that the freer the trade, the better it is for the globe. Free trade generates just so much better outcomes than rivaling protectionist measures. And I think for the WTO to retain relevance, I think that we must increasingly look to proposals being carried out by, or put forth by, groups of states more than individual states, i.e. I think that one possible world forward would be to have track 2 negotiations amongst like-minded states aimed at putting forth majority proposals rather than just national positions. That might be a way to re-energize the WTO. I also think, although I don't think it's relevant right now, but actually to bring forth voting mechanisms, and that might be one path forward. I also think that the WTO needs to maybe step back from some of the issues that is, I think, at the crux for the Americans' reluctance to block appointments for the appellant body. I think that the Americans are not wrong to say that there were elements of judicial overreach at the WTO, and I think that the WTO bureaucracy would be wise to perhaps redirect their efforts towards arguably more important issues pertaining to free trade when it comes to immaterial rather than material trade, and the digital economy, which I think is a huge space with a huge potential, especially for India, that we need to have a functioning free trade regime on. Dear friends, it has been a pleasure to talk to you here today, and I look forward to my colleagues' comments.
Thank you, Asle, and I think those are very pertinent remarks. Vandana, is this correct, that I have 27 minutes more? Okay, thank you. We've been asked to reimagine the WTO. So I'm going to do precisely that and ask my co-panelists. Asle has already hinted where his loyalties lie, and I will explain what I mean by that. We have 2 big issues on which there are different pathways in which WTO can proceed, and India will have to, make some very crucial decisions. On the negotiating front, really the choice is binary. If you insist every agreement in the WTO has got to be multilateral, has got to be on the basis of consensus by every single participant, which is now 174, then that is one way in which the WTO will go. I mean, that is the current WTO. It's going nowhere, and it will take time, because consensus is not easy, and things will take time. The other way in which WTO can go, and very frankly, since I am no longer with the government, I can stick my neck out and say this, I see the WTO going in this direction, much to India's chagrin and India's disappointment. It can go the plurilateral way. There was an attempt by a group of countries, and this group was not small. Yesterday, the countries were 123 in number, and they wanted to include investment facilitation for development, IFD agreement, They said 123 countries are backing it. It was just India and South Africa which put their foot down and said no. But that is a way in which WTO can be reimagined. India has to be prepared for that. If there are 150 countries in the room which want to go in a particular way, how long can we keep blocking? So that is something that India, I'm not saying India is right or wrong. I'm merely reimagining the WTO. So that is one critical issue on which, Asanka, I want your views, because Asle has already hinted that he is not opposed to majority voting. He sees it as a way to break the deadlock. And that's a legitimate point of view, by the way. So that is what I mean. The second is on the dispute settlement, and that is the way in which you can reimagine. Americans have already reimagined it. They say to hell with the appellate body. We are going back to the GATT system of just panel. There will be a panel system. 3 people like me or others will judge the panel. Once the panel rules some trade measure is illegal, then there will be a complex negotiation between the parties concerned. Now, this gives the Americans unbelievable power. Imagine I had told you about America versus Antigua-Barbuda. If the appellate body was not there, there is no way Antigua-Barbuda would have won. Americans would have just knocked Antigua-Barbuda on the head and every part of their body and said, go to hell, we are not agreeing with you. So that's really power politic and real politic. Interestingly, India has settled all its disputes with the United States in the WTO bilaterally. Please note, since the absence of the appellate body, we have bilaterally negotiated with US, and all WTO disputes between US and India have been settled bilaterally. But India is India. You can't expect Antigua-Barbuda to do the same thing, right? So I think that is one way in which you have to envision the WTO. Do you want the appellate body? And if you want the appellate body, do you wait for post-Donald Trump? Because that is when it will happen. It will not going to happen anytime soon. Or do you go the bilateral route? Because Robert Lighthizer, the previous USTR, has been very clear. He says, we hate the appellate body because they have been accused, as Asle and Asanka said, of judicial overreach. So the real way in which you can reimagine WTO is WTO multilateral or plurilateral? Is WTO based on consensus or WTO based on voting? Is WTO going to go back to the GATT system of panel, or do we continue to insist on the restoration of the appellate body? These are the 2 different visions of the WTO that I see in front of me. Very, very different. And obviously, India would prefer multilateral. India would prefer not to vote. India would prefer appellate body. The question is, are those aspirations realistic? That is the question. And what if 150 countries say, sorry, we don't share that vision. We are okay with voting. We are okay with GATT panel. What's wrong with it? So I want to get the views of first my 2 panelists. Asle, I think, has already said, but if you can add. And then I go to the audience for questions. Asanka, what is your take? Would Sri Lanka, for example, and obviously you're a smaller country than India, so are you okay with this plurilateral voting and GATT panel system?
Well, there is a pitfall when we talk about these plurilateral initiatives. There is a chance that countries behave like blocks. Okay. That's a problem. These global value chains can be further fragmented and concentrated among few friendly countries. Some countries might be further excluded. That's a big problem. In that case, maybe consensus was kind of identified as the most viable solution given the heterogeneities in the countries, among the countries. If we are going for voting, in that case, powerful countries will they accept the majority vote? That's the problem. We are seeing that in the UN. So I don't think other solutions rather than achieving a consensus, though it is hard. maybe the way forward is communicating clearly, okay, what you need. For example, appellate body. Some of the issues, even they are not clear what US is clearly expecting. Then identifying the country-specific issues. For example, India. Public stockholding is very important for food security because large majority of the labor force is in agricultural sector. Maybe establishing a fund to help them, farmers, and they are the consumers also. So whether there is an income transfer, cash transfer, then the political authorities will be able to manage the backlash. Then it will help them to come into a consensus at the WTO. So those kind of approaches might be necessary rather than remodeling this into a way that the effect of WTO will be further reduced and fuel the current block level responses to the trade policy. Yeah.
Okay, so pretty much in favor of status quo. Asle, it's interesting. You're not very much a bigger country than Sri Lanka, right? I hope you don't mind my saying that. You're small too, but your approach is different. You seem to be okay with voting, and you seem to be okay with majority voting in the WTO to find a way forward. Do you still hold on to that view after listening to Asanka?
Well, again, stressing I don't represent the Norwegian government, I think that we do need to have a degree of realism. Just to give you an example, during the high-level week in New York in September last year, only one leader of a great power attended, Joe Biden. In the past, the leaders of all the great powers would attend, including India, and I think this is indicative of the state of multilateral cooperation. There is a degree of globalization fatigue, if you will, in the West, and at the same time we see the forces of geopolitics making these sort of consensus bodies, as the WTO was envisioned, less operable, less likely. And I think that a degree of realism would point in the direction of saying, how can we make this work better? Not how can it be made perfect, how can it be made to work as intended, how can it be fair and equitable, but rather to try to keep the darkness at bay and to try to come up with solutions that will further global trade and increase prosperity in the world.
Thank you very much. So before I throw it open to the floor, the only point I want to make is for some time, I've been observing WTO for a long time now. For some time, I've found that the WTO is directly at odds with the SDGs, frankly. If you see the agriculture agreement of the Uruguay round, actually I can argue that the way they have interpreted the agreement for countries like India, it is against the SDGs goal of abolition of extreme poverty and abolition of hunger. That is why we need the MSP. And the WTO forbids that. And in 1986, we went and somewhat foolishly agreed that the subsidies given will not exceed 10% of the value of a commodity. I remember asking Mr. Hoda, who was really the father of India's trade policy, that listen, is this 10% enough? All my civil servant friends laughed at me and said, listen, we are nowhere near that figure. But I'm proud to say it was a legitimate question. I was looking forward to an age where maybe we are capable, and today we exceed the 10% threshold in sugar and rice. That is why you need the peace clause in the WTO. So actually you can argue the WTO is not working or not helping countries work in favor of achieving SDGs, intellectual property rights, clearly against access for medicine for all. Where is the question? I mean, the intellectual property rights favor patents. They favor big pharma. They do not favor universal access for health. Everybody knows that. And that is why I had argued that we need to have an SDG round of negotiations in the WTO. That's the only way out. Poor countries and developing countries are not convinced that WTO helps them achieve their development aspirations. It helps corporates, yes, in both India and US or in the West. But I'm talking about developmental aspirations of abolishing poverty, access to health, access to water, and access to medicines. Those are the things which I think the WTO is not openly seen as achieving. Any questions from the audience? Because we have a wonderful panel, and I thought if there's anything at all, yes, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Shafat Yusuf. I have two-pronged question. One is that as we see WTO going forward, do you see there is a remnant of some colonial, thing there that West is still going on with its colonial past and imposing things on global South? And at the same time, while we see that free trade agreements, it sound good, but there is a condescending and patronizing attitude from Europe, for example, from US to, from Europe to global South. Okay, what's good in their, how they are going to benefit and what's good in their favor. So they need to accept that. So is at the same time a need to decolonize WTO? What do you think about that? Thank you.
Oh, it's interesting. Maybe we take a couple of questions. Are there other questions before I answer that? Yeah, someone in the back, please. This is on colonization and the need to decolonize the WTO. Thank you. If somebody can give the mic at the back. No question? Yeah. Ambassador Lata Reddy? Yeah.
Actually, Mohan, I wanted to comment on something you said when you talked about Mr. Hoda being the father of Indian trade policy. I completely agree with you. I was in the Commerce Ministry at that time. I worked on foreign trade policy. And I learned a lot both from Mr. Hoda and from Mrs. Usha Vora, who was also in charge of the Americas division at that time. And what we discovered was that there was a real lack of expertise, in the Foreign Service and in the Commerce Ministry on what exactly were the elements of trade policy. Now, I'm not quite sure what the situation is today, and I'd like your views, as someone who's worked on trade policy before and has followed developments in the WTO, that how can we help developing countries, particularly perhaps India doesn't need it to the same extent today because we've built up quite a good cadre of people who are experts on foreign trade policy. But other countries do need that kind of help. How exactly do you see the developed world as being able to help us in building this expertise?
Thank you. Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, and then I'll turn to the panelists and give you my own responses.
Mohan, my question is directed to you. And the way I see it, and I'm being brutally frank about our own country, India, and my question is directed to you. Our positions at the WTO, India's positions at the WTO, actually reflect our own weaknesses. Except for IT and IT services, we are really uncompetitive anywhere else. And that's why we are always defensive at the WTO. Do you agree with me? And how do we set this right at home?
Thank you. Tough questions for me. Asanka and Asle, I'll come to you about the decolonizing WTO question. I want you to address that. Other questions are more India specific, but you're most welcome to chip in. Ambassador Lata Reddy, the French have a saying, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, which means the more things change, more they are the same. I wish I could agree with you when you say that India has a cadre of top quality. I'm putting words in your mouth. We are definitely in a better position. But we have a way of bringing in district magistrates of Jhumri Talaya and making them immediately joint secretary TPD who will go and negotiate with UK. The Indian Administrative Service, and please don't take me the wrong way, there are wonderful officers there like Mr. Hoda, But that was an exception. Mr. Hoda spent his whole lifetime doing trade policy. We are just sending an envoy to WTO. The less said, the better. I don't think he has done trade policy at all. And that's what we are doing. And EU has told me, when I met the EU negotiator on FTA, and I kept saying, you know, we must do it. He says, Mohan, but where is your expertise? There is only one lady, and she is busy with UK. Ask her to please finish with UK and then come to me. This is what they said. So we have a massive shortage of manpower. And that is because we are not able to figure out how to put people in commerce ministry for long periods of time. So we have that problem. I'm happy to say that there are any number of ways in which now people can get trained if they want to, if their governments would let them. For example, the WTO training course is very good. And I would encourage all the young people that I see, do the 3-week course. It's not expensive. It gives you a wonderful introduction to trade policy. See, the problem is, and I'm sharing my personal view here, I wanted to go to New York, like every good foreign service officer. And there was Mr. Hardeep Puri, who's now our minister, who told me, you're going as FS GATT. And my first question to him was, what the hell is GATT? That's how I was posted. I was doing DS Sri Lanka, and I found all the high flyers in the foreign service going to PMI New York. I said, why the hell are you condemning me to GATT? He said, Abhay Chupro, you know, Mr. Hardeep Puri told me in chaste Punjabi that, shut up, I'm giving you the best possible job. I said, that may be true, but I don't know what GATT is. And then I went to Geneva to make things worse. The American negotiator asked me, what are you going to do? And like an idiot, I said, I'm First Secretary GATT. And they all laughed. I said, why are you laughing? They said, you can't do GATT. I've been doing anti-dumping for 20 years. How the hell are you going to do GATT? One person. And it was just Mr. B.K. Zucchi and me. 2 people to represent 1 billion people. I'm sorry to tell you, things are not very much better even now. They're definitely slightly better, but not very much. So I think we need, see, there is a thing called Indian Trade Service. Do people even know there is an Indian Trade Service? Why not get somebody from there, a lot of people from there, train them in WTO? What's the problem? But, you know, we have the caste system even in the civil service. What else can I say? You know, that's really the problem. Gautam, your question is $1 million question. And you should know the answer at least from me because I'm no longer with the government. I think you're absolutely right. Our objection to the investment facilitation agreement yesterday night is based on principle, not on substantive grounds. They're using the same argument. I was very proud, but not so proud. They're using the same argument which I trotted out in Seattle to object to investment. And that was year of the Lord 1999. We are now 2024. You're still objecting to investment in the WTO. You're absolutely right. Our positions also have to undergo a change. There are only 2 areas in which India should walk out of WTO if need be. One is agriculture. It's a patently unfair agreement. Europeans and Americans were subsidizing to their heart's content. There was a time when Europe and America were subsidizing $1 billion a day. And they are now telling us don't subsidize Punjab farmers. That's absurd. Whatever we do internally is our problem. But I'm saying WTO has no business preaching to us on agriculture. Similarly, fisheries. On every other issue, our positions are totally untenable. Because that's what I have said in my new book, India's Moment. If some young person is interested, the cost of a cafe latte in Starbucks, so please pick it up. I mean, one of the things that I say is Indian negotiators get policy space. You know, we are obsessed with policy space. Mr. Kelkar would know, sir, policy space. Everything, we need policy space. My question in that book is, have you used the policy space that we acquired for you with such difficulty? Textiles, did we use our policy space of 10 years? Finally, we are now competing with Bangladesh, we're competing with Sri Lanka, we are competing with Vietnam. We are not able to compete with anybody else. And as you say, we are thoroughly uncompetitive. So anyway, that will require a separate session, but I completely agree with you. We have to get our act, our internal act in order. On the decolonizing WTO, I'll start with Asanka and then turn to Asle. Okay, Asle first.
No, I must insist, since I think it would be more appropriate that somebody from the Global South takes this question first.
You have 2 seconds, otherwise I can answer, no problem. You go ahead, go ahead. You should. Just 2 seconds, yeah.
Yeah, as I said, actually, WTO's intention was as a coordination body, because it's like in business dilemma. Both countries have an incentive to resort to unilateral increase of tariffs. The most welfare-increasing point is reducing tariffs, but for that, there should be binding constraint, binding commitments. That's why this GATT and WTO was forced. All the other innovative solutions, my worry is, will deviate from that particular function. That's my view about that. This is not about Madam's question. Trade negotiation is vested upon elected politicians, governments. I think it's a people's sovereignty. They can choose the negotiators. They should be like that, because this is about the livelihood of the people. Unless technocrats like us, if we go by textbook, millions of people can be affected. My understanding from Sri Lanka's experience is the government should have a permanent cadre with technical expertise to support the negotiators. Unfortunately, it is not the case according to our experience. When it comes to trade negotiations, we were just asked, okay, come and give us this. That's the problem of the, maybe that's my experience in Sri Lanka. I'm not very familiar with India's case. Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. The story is not very different in South Asia. Asle, you want to say? Norway, I am assuming, has 1 million people trained in WTO?
We have very able negotiators, but we do suffer from some of the challenges that India has, that it's a very specialized field of diplomacy, and they're rare and very valuable, I might say. When it comes to the question of decolonization, thank you very much for your comments. I wholeheartedly subscribe to this view. And I do think, however, well, not really however, but in addition to what you said, that I think that at the current time, rather than to be backward-looking and to focus on the injustices of the past, which there is much to be said about, I think for the benefit of the globe, I think that this is a good time to look forward, and perhaps a better starting point than to talk about colonialism and contentious issues. I think that we need to have a more of a win-win mindset, and to see how can we make what we have work better, and to work better for the majority of the global population who are living in the global south.
So on that note of eternal optimism, which can only be expressed by a Norwegian, I would like to conclude the meeting under Vandana's stern gaze. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Please give them a big round of applause. What a spirited discussion. Very honest by all of them. May I invite Prashant Girvaner to come up and give our esteemed panelists a token of appreciation. So let's start with the one who's come from furthest away, Asle. Dr. Asle Toje, Deputy Leader, Norwegian Nobel Committee. And then to Dr. Asanka Wijesinghe. Big round of applause, please. A Saturday morning round of applause. And then to our very spirited moderator of the session, Ambassador Mohan Kumar.